Greetings and welcome to the basement. In this quick little video, we're going to take a look at the navigation system, but this time we're going to take a look at it with PlayMaker instead of C# like we did previously. To make sure that you are all properly set up for this, you are going to need a couple of things. Well, first of all, starting with something that you don't technically need. No, not preferences, package manager. There we go. I am going to be using ProBuilder to construct out the level. That is purely optional. You can do the exact same thing with Unity cubes, but I will be using that. Not so optional will be PlayMaker, obviously, since we're going to be using that. And then I'm also going to be grabbing something off of the ecosystem, because something you will discover very quickly if you download and install the base version of PlayMaker, and then you go to try to find anything related to pathfinding, any of the NavMesh agent or NavMesh stuff, you can't find it. It's not part of the default PlayMaker install. And while I usually grumble about this behavior from PlayMaker, in this particular case I understand it. Not every game is going to use pathfinding. In fact, potentially a lot of games won't, so it makes sense to not have this be part of the base install. My preferred method for grabbing it is through the ecosystem, which you can get the ecosystem by going to PlayMaker, add-ons, and if you don't have the ecosystem installed, you should only see the download add-ons link here, which will take you to the add-ons page, and there it is, the ecosystem browser. Just download that package, install it, and you're good to go. You can just directly download the Unity pathfinding from this link here. However, I do prefer to grab things from the ecosystem. It's just a good way of being able to see whether or not I've got it up to date. As you can see here, you just put in pathfinding, do a search. Here the package will come up, and you can see here that everything's green, good to go. I have it installed, and that is that. So go ahead and get those things set up, PlayMaker and the pathfinding package. Because if you don't got those, well, it's going to be a little rough to follow along. Let's get our test level constructed here. So I'm going to go ahead and save out this scene, nav demo. And for my shapes, I'm just going to create a series of 5x5 cubes, which I've already got the numbers put in. Again, if you're not using ProBuilder, you can just simply take a Unity cube and scale it out. It doesn't matter. I'll go ahead and reset this. Oh, and it would appear that I am operating in 2D mode at the moment. That's going to be a little inconvenient. Let's switch that projection to perspective. And let's fix my camera position here. Yoink. That's a me problem. Chances are if you created a default project, yours is in proper 3D mode. And let's put a light in here too. Directional light. Yeah, they're always good. I mean, not quite that down. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so I'm just going to take and create a fairly simple little walkway here. And there we go. I am ready. Well, mostly. I am not create empty, at least not yet. I'm also going to create just a regular old cube and drop it in right there to serve as an obstacle. I'm just going to call that OBSD. And as per my usual, I am going to create an empty now, and I am going to call this underscore level. I'm going to reset this back to the origin, and I'm going to shove all of my level pieces in there. Are you? Yes, okay. You should be in there as well. There we go. Now we covered this part in the C# video, but just in case you haven't watched that one, you access the navigation window by going into Windows, AI, and by default it's the only thing that's in there. You can define agents. This is for defining different things, like if you want large creatures, large vehicles, small vehicles, etc. So that way things have different widths and different clearances. You can define areas where you can put in custom costs to determine whether or not things want to go through certain sections of the level or not. Bake, where you actually bake the NavMesh. And then an object window for setting specific properties, as in, what area a piece of geometry happens to have, or if you want something to not be walkable. Now, at the base level, in order for the navigation system to work, you have to have static objects. Not static colliders, because all of these are static colliders. They have a mesh collider, no rigid body, therefore static collider. That does not make them static game objects. To get a static game object, you need to have the static button up here checked, which I'm going to use my collection here, tell it yes, change all children. So now all of my children are statics. With that done, I can go into the navigation pane, go into Bake, click on the Bake button, and I'll get this nice little blue preview. Now at the moment I don't have any issues with this square here, but I am just going to grab it here real quick and scale it to make a point, and that is if I was to bake it now, I have a walkable area on top of this square. That may or may not be what you want. And so since I don't actually want this square to be walkable in any way, shape, or form, I can go to Object, change this navigation area to not walkable, and now when I bake it, it no longer has that walkable area on the top. Of course, I don't want it that big. That would be a bit silly and it would be in the way, so I'm going to take that back down. Notice that upon making that change, it doesn't alter the already baked NavMesh. You always have to rebake your NavMesh anytime you make a change. Also keep in mind that flagging game objects as static has lighting implications, so be aware of that when working with NavMesh. Okay, so that is enough level setup. Let's get my agent in here and get that agent moving. So I am going to go ahead and, like I did previously, I'm going to create a capsule. I'll place him over here. I'm not going to worry about his orientation. And by the way, there's nothing magical about having this starting spot over here like that. The key thing is that you just have a reasonable enough area for this thing to move in. We are eventually going to, in later videos, be putting in patrol points here. So I have my capsule. Now I also want to be able to tell which direction he's going. So I'm going to toss in a cube. Scale that down, probably down to like, I don't know, 0.25 probably will work just fine. And then grab said cube, move it forward on the Z, so that way I've got a little pokey nose showing me where he is looking. Might be useful to put some contrasting materials on there, so you know what, let me just create a quick material, which I will call red matte. I will shockingly make it red. Bet you didn't see that one coming. And I'll just apply that to my cube. So we have Rudolph the Red-Nosed Cylinder. Doesn't quite have the same catch as the original, but it'll catch on, I'm sure. Now, I don't want to actually have all of the game objects and stuff on the capsule itself. I like keeping this kind of stuff as just visual reference when in fact that's what it is. So I am going to remove the capsule collider off of this. And I'm going to remove the box collider off of the nose. I am going to create an empty game object as a child, break the link, and move the capsule onto it. And this I shall call the player. And if you are unfamiliar with that trick, by the way, If you want to create another game object at the exact same location as another game object, but don't necessarily need it to be a child, create it as a child anyways, because a child object will always be created at the exact same location as its parent. So a useful little shortcut there for getting that to match up exactly. Now I do need to have a little bit of setup here. I am going to need a NavMesh agent component added onto this. It is going to expect some kind of a collider on here, so I am going to add on a capsule collider. And notice we do have some fixing here to do. And I am going to need to set the capsule collider height to 2. If I offset this a little bit, you can see there it is. Having the height of 2 makes it match the capsule. And then for the NavMesh agent, I am going to change the base offset to 1, so that way that cylinder perfectly matches up with our capsule. And with that, we have almost all of our setup done. One last thing left. I am going to need a game object that's going to serve as our target move point. And so for that, I'm going to come in here and create a sphere. Snap to contact, Control Shift, drag it over here to a corner, not too far off into the corner, because if it is off the NavMesh, bake, thank you. If it's off the NavMesh, you're not going to be able to reach it, so I do want to make sure that it is reasonably placed. Full-size cylinders, or full-size spheres, probably a bit much, so I'll go ahead and scale that down and make it a little bit visible by turning it red. And I shall call this Move Target. And with that, we have the level set up for further experimentation. So the next step here is to create a PlayMaker state machine on our player. So with the player selected, I'm going to go over to my PlayMaker window, and I'm going to follow the prompt to right-click to add a state machine. And as always, I am going to do my setup, finished, control drag out a new state. And in this particular case, we'll actually use it. I'm also going to rename this state to test move FSM, because I always like renaming my state machines as well. It gets confusing when you click on this little thing here and you see nothing but FSM, 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 FSM. Don't like at all. So, basic movement. What do I want to have happen? Well, I want this guy to move to this point. What are we going to need? Well, in terms of variables, let's first of all take a look at our actions. Now to think about it, let's take a look at our actions. Actually, set destinations what I want, but I'm going to do this the manual way. Scroll down here. We have NavMesh actions and NavMesh agent actions. Everything related towards moving an agent through the NavMesh, shockingly enough, is going to be under the NavMesh agent. There's a variety of options here, but the simplest one to use is the set agent destination. And notice it's going to take a vector variable type. So if in this state 1, I say this is my start move state, I'm going to drag in that set destination. I obviously don't want to use a hard-coded position like this. So instead, I am going to create a new variable. Move target position. Now, you might think it's like, okay, great. I got a vector 3 here. I'll just make this visible in the inspector, so that way when I come over here and expand out controls, it's right there. And I can take my move target and not drag it in. Doesn't work that way. If I want to be able to do that, and I do want to be able to do that, I need an extra step. What I need is I need a transform or a game object. I mean, either way works. I'm going to put it in as a game object. And this I want to have in the inspector. This I don't want to have in the inspector. And now I can drag move target, drop it into there. Of course, this is a game object, not a vector3. So in my setup, I am going to want to... Oh, hey, look at this. I got get position. And I lied earlier, it does need to be a game object, not a transform. So get position. Yoink that into my setup state. Not use owner. I want to specify a game object. I want to use a variable, and I want to use my move target. And then I'm going to store this result in my move target position vector. And that will start it moving. In theory. Will it work? Let's see. So hop back over to scene, double check to make sure I have a sane camera. That's not particularly sane. Let's change that. Let's hit the run button, see what happens. And sure enough, our little guy makes a beeline for the red dot and stops. Now, there's a couple of important additional pieces of information we'd want to take a look at. For example, how do we know when we're done? So to that end, I am going to just real quick drop in a UI text element. I am going to place that text element in the upper left-hand corner. I'm going to tell it best fit. Just make things nice and neat, put in 3 little dashes. So yep, that's what's going to look like when it starts. And then once our little guy makes it over here, we're going to inform the user that movement is done. So how do we do that? Let's go back over here to PlayMaker, select our player. So we've started moving. Now, one thing when you use set destination is it has to calculate a path. In this particular example, it's nearly instantaneous. I believe it should pick up on the next frame. This is not always the case. Sometimes it can take several frames for this to pick up. So in this particular case, what I'm going to do is once the path pending event has been done, in other words, it has successfully found a path and is going to start moving, I am going to have it call a finished transition. Be our moving state. Actually, moving number 1 because, yeah, in future videos, I'm going to be coming back here and adding stuff in here. I'll have another moving state. So I am now moving. Excellent. How do I know when I'm there? The computer equivalent of are we there yet? Well, again, we can come through and look at our NavMesh agent stuff. And in this particular case, I'd want to look at gets. It's like there's a lot of gets here. And oh, hey, look at this. Get agent remaining distance. That sounds useful. Let's drag that in. Again, game object, use owner. And I should have mentioned that back here. This is correct because the state machine is on the object that has the NavMesh agent on it. That might not always be the case. Obviously, change that as needs dictate. Now, in this particular case, I'm not going to store the results. I am, however, going to check this every frame because I just want to spin endlessly in this state. And when we arrive, I will call finished, which will transition me off to a new state. Done moving. And in here, I am just going to use a set text command. Oop, wrong thing. There we go. Definitely not use owner in this particular case. I'll specify the game object. And we will say done moving. And we'll just stay there. And does this work? Well, we'll see it well enough. We start off he goes, no message, and once we arrive, done moving. Might not seem particularly enthralling, but when we go to take a look at how to set this up for patrol points, this is going to be really kind of important. But this video is long enough, so we shall save that for later. If this quick video has been useful to you, the like button is right down there. And if I have bored you and not taught you anything particularly interesting, well, the dislike button is right next to it. And so, until next time.